Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the Edexcel Specification English Language Paper 1A. That's the part of the paper which deals with a 19th century unseen extract. That means that they could give you any extract from any book that was written in the 19th century. You'll be asked to read it and then answer a series of 4 questions that get progressively harder and longer. So in this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through each question, explaining the assessment objectives and offering you some model responses so you can see what you're aiming for. Rather than using a past paper, I've written this one myself. It's from a novel called Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Bronte. And don't worry, it doesn't matter that you don't have it in front of you, because on the PowerPoint, I have actually popped the extract for you there. So I'll talk you through it on the screen. So let's get started. Let's have a look at what's on the paper. As I mentioned before, this paper has 4 questions for you to answer that get progressively harder as the paper progresses. The first 2 questions are assessing assessment objective 1, which is information retrieval, so definitely the easiest part of the paper. They'll ask you questions prompting you to look in certain areas of the extract, and you'll simply need to find the information, a phrase or a quote, and I'll show you the examples in just a moment. Question 3 is slightly harder, which is why it is worth 6 marks. This is assessment objective 2, the analysis of language and structure. Again, they will prompt you to a small bit of the text, maybe 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs max for you to analyse. The 4th and final question in this section is assessing AO4, which is evaluation. Now, this question wants you to evaluate the entire extract, and that is why it is worth a whopping 15 marks. So it's really important that you give yourself enough time to do this question justice. But don't worry, even though it looks like it's going to be harder because it's worth the most marks, I've got a really useful acronym that will help you navigate your way through the extract. So what's this funny word that I have got on the screen? My students will lovingly know it as the bakura. It sounds like a bird sound, but actually it's a really good way to get you through the exam. It gives you a process to follow, so it won't feel too overwhelming. The P stands for preview. This is the moment where you simply look at the paper. Now, at the top of the extract, they should give you an italicized blurb. That just explains the context of the piece and almost summarizes to a degree what's going on. It is vitally important that you read that because it starts you off with knowledge that you wouldn't have had before. It stops you from making silly mistakes about relationships between characters, etc. Once you have previewed, read the blurb, had a little look, then you're going to look at the questions. So read the questions through, and if they've given you line numbers, just mark them out on the extract. You're allowed to write on the extract. It's great for annotating. So if question 1 is in the first 5 lines, mark that out so you know where you're looking. Then, funnily enough, the first R stands for read. That's right, you're going to read the paper and you're going to read it again. And then you might even read it a 3rd time. The most important thing is that you understand the content of this extract. There's no point picking out a metaphor if you don't know what's going on. Now, as you're doing your read through, you can be armed with a highlighter or a pen so you can make notes as you go, preparing yourself for the answers. The next R is respond. That's right, you actually have to write down your answers. And as you go, you're gonna do the final R of the bakura, and that is to review. That simply means check your answers. Don't wait until the very end, because you might have run out of time. You might have lost your bearings. So every time you write a paragraph, have a quick read through and double check, not just that it makes sense, but that you have hit the assessment objectives. If you do it after each paragraph, you're less likely to make mistakes as you go through the paper. For example, in question 3, you might write a paragraph, read through it, and think to yourself, I've not used any critical terminology. So you'll go back, you'll add some bits, and then your second paragraph, you'll have it in your mind. Much better than waiting to the end and having to correct the whole lot. So that is the bakura, an easy way just to give yourself a little bit of order to tackling that paper. So let's imagine we're doing it right now. Let's do the bakura with this piece of text. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you the blurb to this extract from Jane Eyre. And here it is. So this is what I'm imagining an examiner might write. In this extract, taken from Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, the narrator, Jane, is awoken by a frightening noise coming from above her bedroom. She goes out to investigate and finds all of the guests staying at the house in panic and fear. Okay, so we already know a number of things. We know that there's a first-person narrator whose name is Jane. We know that she wakes up because she hears a noise, that there are other people staying in this house, and they all get up and they're frightened. So you've already got that in your brain before you even read it. So that's the first bit of the preview. The second thing I said was just to look at the paper, not read it, just look at it. And here is us looking at it. So if I was looking at it, I'd think, ooh, okay, got some direct speech there. Got a really, really short little paragraph here. Oh yeah, look at my hyphens. Oh, and that looks interesting. I'm not reading in particular, but I'm just sort of having a look and kind of almost guessing the areas that are going to be quite useful. If you can't see anything of merit, don't worry, move on to the next stage, which is, of course, the questions. So read those questions through, mark them out on the paper, as I said before, and here are the questions that we are going to look at. So we've got from lines 1 to 7, find a phrase that demonstrates that Jane is shocked by the sound. From the very first paragraph, find 2 reasons for Jane being awake in the middle of the night. From lines 6 to 9, how does Bronte use language and structure to present the noise that Jane hears? And in this extract, there is an attempt to create a fearful mood, evaluate how successfully this has been achieved. Now, I do just want to make a little note here. This process doesn't always work for everyone. Some people need to read the extract through before they look at the questions, because some people just need to do one thing at a time rather than trying to cross over. If that's you, that's fine. Find the way that works for you, but this is a way through. Okay, so it's up to you. Have a go at both, see what you prefer. So we've got our questions, we know what we're looking for, so we're going to start reading and preparing. So let's have a look at questions 1 and 2. So we know that we're looking at where Jane is shocked, okay, by the noise. So we're going to have a little scroll down. So this is the section that has been given to us in the paper. I'm just going to read this little bit aloud to you, okay? So I'd forgotten to draw my curtain, which I usually did, and also to let down my window blind. The consequence was that when the moon, which was full and bright, for the night was fine, came in her course to that space in the sky opposite my casement, and looked in at me through the unveiled panes, her glorious gaze roused me. Awaking in the dead of night, I opened my eyes on her disk, silver white and crystal clear. It was beautiful, but too solemn. I half rose and stretched my arm to draw the curtain. Good God! What a cry! The night, its silence, its rest, was rent in twain by a savage, a sharp, a shrilly sound that ran from end to end of Thornfield Hall. Okay. So hopefully you were already looking out for your questions 1 and 2. Question 1, where you were asked to find a phrase that shows that Jane is shocked, hopefully you saw here. This is the moment that she hears the sound. There's no description of the sound here. And then this is her internal thought. Now it asks you for a phrase. So the trick here is you would either use good God or you would go, what a cry. If you put both of them in, that's putting in 2 phrases, and a mean examiner might not give you the mark. Okay, so there's our potential answers for question 1. Question 2 asks for you to find 2 examples, well, 2 reasons why Jane is lying awake at night. So, what have we got? She's forgotten to draw her curtains. She's forgotten to let down her window blind. And the moon is full and bright, shining through. You only need 2, but there are 3 possible answers for you to go from. Now, you can use your own words, or you can use quotes. In question 1, you have to use the quote itself. So, in the exam, this is the kind of thing you would write down. You'd either write down those 2 words, or this little phrase here for question 1, and then you see how I've sort of summarised in my own words for question 2. So that part of the paper, you can actually find the answers as you read through first or second time. So it's nice and speedy, and then just jot them in. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have a little look at our question on language and structure. So for this question, we are looking at how Bronte uses language and structure to present the noise that Jane hears. So you've got to remember that there are a couple of different ways into this. There's the actual physical descriptions of the noise, but you can also look at how Jane responds to the noise and what that therefore suggests. So don't worry and think, oh goodness, it only describes it a little bit in the first paragraph. There is more to say here. So when you are looking at annotating or finding your devices, it's really important that you look for sort of what I call the high money areas where you can talk about language and structure at the same time. Now, if you're feeling a little bit underconfident about what the difference is between language and structure and how you approach this in detail, please have a little look at my video on question 3 specifically, which goes into a lot more depth. But for now, I'm going to talk you through what we can see here and what it suggests about the sound before I show you a model response. So if this was me in the exam, the things that I would be looking at, I'd start up here. The night, its silence, its rest, was rent in twain by a savage, a sharp, a shrilly sound that ran from end to end of Thornfield Hall. Okay, so immediately I'm starting to see devices as well as thinking about how violent and loud this sound appears to be. I'm picking out adjectives like savage, sharp and shrilly, a list of 3 in itself. I'm picking up the fact that there's sibilant alliteration and fricative alliteration here in sharp and shrilly, and the connotations of those words. Well, savage sounds very, very kind of violent and almost primal, suggests the person that has made this noise is in perhaps a great state. The idea of the violence of the sound is also created through juxtaposition. If you look here, the night has been personified. The night is at rest, but that rest and that peace, the silence of the night, is rent in twain. That means broken in 2. So suggesting massive violence. You've got this juxtaposition between the silence and then this savage, sharp, shrill sound. That's where I'd start. And I would make sure that I combined all of those features into one paragraph. I wouldn't separate it out and think, well, I'm going to do a structure paragraph on a triad and then I'm going to do another paragraph on the language features. No, get them all in and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. The next thing I'd look at is this little bit here. My pulse stopped, my heart stood still, my stretched arm was paralysed. Now those are Jane's reactions or the narrator's reactions, but we can tell that the sound is really terrifying because of how she responds. And look at the exaggeration or hyperbole, if you want a slightly fancier word, in this triadic structure. My pulse stopped, my heart stood still, metaphorical, my stretched arm was paralysed. So the sound has a physical reaction on Jane. It's like she's paralysed with fear. That's then backed up by this adjective where it describes it being a fearful shriek. Now, let's imagine you were looking at this bit. Indeed, whatever being uttered that fearful shriek could not soon repeat it. Not the widest winged condor on the Andes could twice in succession send out such a yell. from within his the shrouding of his eyrie. Sorry, stumbled. Okay, so this bit you might think to yourself, "Oh, I don't know what any of that means. What does this mean? What's the wildest winged condor?" Now, if you can't work it out, and there's other interesting features that you can work out, just don't worry about it. Don't spend time fretting about what you can't figure out. Write about what you can. Okay, and this bit really what she's saying is that the sound itself is so frightening, is so unique that no bird could make it again. They couldn't make that sound and then repeat it. Now, let's have a little look at a model so you can see what I mean about this combination of language and structure. Okay, let's have a look. Bronte emphasises how violent and brutal the sound is through juxtaposition with the silence of the night beforehand. So I'm straight in, there's no introduction, you don't need an introduction, you just get straight into the analysis. I've been clear about how the sound is presented, violent and brutal, and I've already started using some critical terminology. The night, its silence, its rest was rent in twain by a savage, a sharp, a shrilly sound. Firstly, she personifies the night, referring to its rest, creating a peaceful atmosphere. She then juxtaposes the tranquility with the harsh metaphor rent in twain, suggesting that any piece has been obliterated, torn apart. Okay, so I've got juxtaposition, personifies there, so structure and language. Her triad, structure, of descriptive adjectives, language, savage, sharp and shrilly, in combination with the noun sound, create both alliteration and sibilance, representing its tone. Sharp and shrilly, also highlighting how high-pitched the noise is. The adjective savage, also a metaphor, makes the sound appear primal and primitive, perhaps animalistic, suggesting whoever made it is out of control. Okay, so that's quite a long paragraph, but look how densely packed it is with analysis and with critical terms. If this was in a real thing, I would suggest another short paragraph looking at Jane or the narrator's response. But that's really what it should look like. Okay, moving on to question 4. A little reminder of what the question was. In this extract, there is an attempt to create a fearful mood. Evaluate how successfully this has been achieved. So it's worth 15 marks. You know that you're going to spend a decent amount of time, probably about 20-25 minutes writing your response to this. And you also know that the examiners want you to cover as much as you can. So here is the extract in its entirety. Now you might just have a little look down here where I've said use Spike to plan your answer. This is that really handy little formula and acronym to help you make sure that you have a good range of points. So if you weren't aware of this, this stands for setting, people, ideas, tone and events. People in this case kind of means characters, okay, because it's a fiction piece. And what's a great thing to do is just use this to make sure you're covering a range of ideas. So if it were me, I would start off by thinking about setting, and I'd think, oh, okay, she's alone in her room. The moon is full. That's quite sinister, even though the moon is presented as quite beautiful. You've got that kind of gothic overtone that perhaps foreshadows some of the danger. Yeah, I talk about that. Now, I wouldn't talk about anything that I had already mentioned in question 3. I'd want to make sure that I was giving my examiner new information. But that doesn't stop you from looking at anything from questions 1 or 2. So I would definitely look at this moment, good God, what a cry, because that shows fear immediately. It shows that she's shocked, she's stunned. The fact that we've got minor exclamative sentences, again, presents that idea of almost disbelief of what she's heard. So I definitely use that in terms of P, as in character response. I'd also think about character in this very mysterious bit of dialogue that comes down here. Let me just read this to you. It came out of the 3rd story, for it passed overhead. And overhead, yes, in the room just above my chamber ceiling, I now heard a struggle, a deadly one it seemed from the noise, and a half-smothered voice shouted, "Help, help, help!" 3 times rapidly. "Will no one come?" it cried. And then, while the staggering and stamping went on wildly, I distinguished through plank and plaster, "Rochester! Rochester! For God's sake, come!" A chamber door opened, someone ran or rushed along the gallery, another step stamped on the flooring above, and something fell. And there was silence. Oh, so I definitely want to mention something here. I'd want to mention the dialogue and the way that this dialogue creates a sense of desperation, increasing the fear. I might reference the repetition and the exclamative minors. I might think about this plea for help. Will no one come? Suggesting that he was expecting someone to have already come to help him, but nobody has. So this is again another reference to like people or a character. Now, then I'd have a little look at the ending, because in my preview, when I first read, I couldn't help but notice all of this. And so then I just have another look. The sleepers were all aroused, ejaculations, terrified murmurs sounded in every room. That means, in this case, shouting loudly, okay? Door after door unclosed, one looked out and another looked out, the gallery filled, gentlemen and ladies alike had quitted their beds, and, "Oh, what is it? Who is hurt? What has happened? Fetch a light! Is it fire? Are there robbers? Shall we run?" Now, what I'd be doing here, now I'd say you could relate this to either tone or events. It's certainly an event happening, but the tone is really chaotic. It suggests massive confusion. And how do you know, or how does that get to fear? And how do you discuss it? Well, I would be talking about all of the questions, like rhetorical questions or interrogatives. I'd be talking about the exclamatives. And I would be talking about the fact that each bit of dialogue is actually only separated by a hyphen, suggesting that all of these bits of speech from all of these different people are overlapping each other. It's all happening again and again and again. So all of these people en masse are frightened and confused and shouting. And then if you look at the content of it, it's all a suggestion of danger. So their fear is emphasized because they believe that they are in danger. And then right at the very end, again, this idea of chaos and disorder. They ran to and fro, they crowded together, some sobbed, some stumbled. Okay, so there's this kind of vagueness about who's there. It's all a massive confusion. So what we've essentially done is we've kind of worked out maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs or content for paragraphs that we could write up. Now I want to show you a model here, which I'll just show you on the next slide to help you see the best way to make sure you're hitting that evaluation. Okay, so here is my model response. This is just one paragraph. You obviously need to do more than this. Bronte successfully creates a fearful atmosphere through her typically Gothic setting. The narrator explains how, awaking in the dead of night, I open my eyes on her disc, silver white and crystal clear. This is particularly effective because the dead of night sounds quite sinister. The middle of the night is traditionally quite a scary time, and this is emphasised here through the word dead. Although the metaphor of the moon is quite positive, silver white and crystal clear, connoting innocence and beauty, the moon is ultimately linked with Gothicism and madness, perhaps foreshadowing the danger and fear to come. So this paragraph sits in the S part of spite. It's dealing with setting. You'll notice that in the first sentence, in my topic sentence, I've used the adverb successfully. This is what we call one of our evaluative adjectives and adverbs. And every paragraph that you write should open with some sort of evaluative word, whether it's successful, effective, powerful. It should always have one of those buzzwords, if you like. You then bring in your evidence or your quote, and then this part here is where you justify why it is effective. So why the use of this setting is powerful or effective in creating a fearful tone. Now, if you feel like you need a bit more detail and depth into how to actually tackle a question 4, there is a video coming up that will take you through spite in a lot more detail and take you through a couple of useful acronyms for your evaluative adjectives and adverbs, and also for how to make sure that your paragraph style is definitely evaluative. So please do stay tuned for that. So that is a whole of the 19th century paper walked and talked through. I hope that was helpful in refreshing what you need to do where. Do tune in for other videos in these areas. You've got a question 3 in detail, a question 4 in detail, and soon there will be a video on paper 1 section B, imaginative writing. So if you haven't clicked that button, please subscribe so you know when those videos appear. That's it from me. Thank you for watching. Happy revising.